And speaking of, this is your second visit, and I didn't do this last time, is you get 2 puzzle pieces. And there you go. Sorry, I'll get it for you. I wasn't trying to get my microphone there. Okay, there you go. And if you do come back a third time, then you'll have a whole set. And those will be valuable someday. Probably not. Yeah. So I really enjoyed our talk last time, by the way.
Me too. And I have thought a lot since that talk.
Me too. I have thought about it. I really considered it.
Yeah.
And I've had conversations about it. And I've talked to other people about it, and different people have different ideas about it. And I really have thought about it. It was just today when I was going back onto YouTube, I thought I shouldn't do this right now. And but it was really one of the more interesting discussions I had, I think. And so I'd like to possibly pick up where we left off. And I think you've thought about it and I've thought about it. Yeah. And I wonder if we're going to kind of quickly resolve some things and then maybe possibly move on.
Yes, especially objective and subjective. I'd like to sweep that away as soon as we can.
Okay.
As soon as possible.
Let's do that.
My point when we were talking about that was that I felt objective about a subjective view, mainly that I was transgender. Do we need to go back over the premise?
No.
Good.
We don't need to do that.
Okay.
And if you're watching this, there's a whole video you can watch about this prior. And I made some missteps for sure. Basically what you're saying is it's objective for me, because who else is a better person to comment on my belief than me?
Right.
It's an internal,
internal thing. But I think the question becomes, could we ever really truly get objective? Because I've done some research since we last talked, and one of the things you talked about was the You Are Not So Smart podcast. And one in particular I listened to was from a author, Richard Burton, who talked about certainty and how we know what we know.
Yeah.
And how we know what we know can never really be separated from how we grew up, our own internal feelings about something. And I thought, well, that's very true. I don't think you can separate.
That's my dog that's upset that I am out here and she's in there. No worries.
Oh, it sounded like a scream.
No, it's a little dog. She's all right.
Okay. And so the point I want to make on that objective and subjective, of course it's going to be subjective, because there's always a part of me that feels a certain way about something that may or may not be accurate to someone else. And I can ply you with facts. And this was the point of the book. We can all look at someone we disagree with. For instance, somebody who likes a particular candidate or partisan. We get in a partisan argument and you're arguing with them. And you think, if you just had the facts, and they're thinking the same thing to you, if you just had the facts. And so I can argue the facts. And one of your questions was, why do you lead with your personal story when you're saying it could be subjective? Well, I lead with it because most of us make decisions about things through epiphanies that we feel, not through listening to other people's facts.
Yes, and part of my confusion during our last talk was we were going back and forth a little bit between what science says, and that is what science says about being transgender as a group, as a whole, and whether that is a thing as a whole, versus your subjective feeling of about what it is for you, true for you. And sometimes we were I thought, going back and forth a bit, and without that distinction.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought, let's go back to one of your YouTube comments. Someone had commented saying, what if we let people choose their own gender when they turn 13 and 100% of the females that are born with female chromosomes and 100% of the males that are born with the XY chromosome feel the exact same way? And I would answer that by saying, I would still feel I'm trans. It doesn't change.
Yes, and I remember that comment as well. I thought that was
Yeah.
interesting. I thought maybe the thrust of that comment was, what if we didn't really talk about gender at all
Yeah.
until maybe later, a certain age?
I would still feel that I am transgender. I would still feel wrong in my body. And I think someone else also mentioned detransitioning. And I know detransitioning has been a topic. Because people detransition doesn't diminish my opinion about myself.
Yeah.
It also doesn't diminish my opinion about them. If they want to detransition, that is their story. It's not my story. One day, it's possible, I guess, that I could feel that way. I find it very hard to believe that I would ever feel that way, but people do feel that way. And I have to respect how they feel. I have to respect by somebody who says to me, well, my science says there's no such thing as trans. And you're born one way or you're born the other. And
You would respect someone who said their science said that?
yes, because there are people out there. There's plenty of people that are out there bellowing science. And we can argue that it's not very true, but over the past, in this 1 year, there are 35 legislatures that have attempted to pass anti-trans
So
youth
you're
bills.
saying they're using their
They're using their science,
to
yes.
support
They're using
maybe
their
cherry
science.
picking
Yes.
science. I see what you're
Yes.
saying.
Yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
Exactly. Using detransition, for instance.
Gotcha.
Or blowing up the percentage that detransitioners make up of people who transition, which is usually around 8%. It's usually very small. And so I think since we last talked, I've moved away from the science and the facts of it. And I want to explain to you the way I feel, how I feel was an
Right.
epiphany when I got gender therapy and we worked through it. And yes, I looked at the science, and part of the science for me was that there are a lot of other people that feel this way. It is a real feeling.
And it is objective to you.
It is objective to me,
in the
yes.
sense that who else can comment on the feeling that you have?
Exactly. And you're right. Nobody could put yourself exactly in the same position as someone else, not with their history, the way how they were, how they learned certain things. For instance, if I ask you what 2 plus 2 is, you'll say 4.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is you think about how you grew up. Your mother or father or teacher said 2 plus 2 is 4, and you would say, well, 2 plus 3 is 4. And they go, no, that is incorrect. That's part of how you think. You can also count 2 plus 2 is 4.
So what's more important to you, being transgender as a thing that science either supports or doesn't support, that shows as a group, or is it just to you, not just, but to you, that this is how I feel and doesn't matter what science supports? I mean, where are you there, would you say?
I would say that for me, I need science. I'm always going to need science.
Yeah.
That's just part of that's just part of me.
Yeah.
That's part of what makes up me from, I guess, my experiences that I've had.
But you need science for this belief?
I like to have science support my beliefs. Yes.
Okay.
For instance, I do not want to decide
So if science said that this being transgender wasn't a thing, you would doubt being transgender.
I don't think I would, and science has not said that.
Right. Sure.
So I don't think that would change me. No, I don't think it would change how I feel whatsoever. Okay. I may say, oh, wow, well, I have something nobody else does. And I'm going to go back to this book, an example of someone who had, it's like cotards, and she believed she was dead. That was her belief, was that she was dead. And people would say to her, but you have a pulse. And her response was, well, I guess dead people have a pulse then. Once she got over it, now I know that was a brain injury, but that's the way our brains think. Yeah. And that's the way mine thinks. If you tell me that science says transgender people don't exist, I would probably respond with, well, science hasn't interviewed me yet.
Are we saying that her belief is true, that she might have been dead at that?
I'm saying for her.
She might have felt dead, and that's true,
yes.
for her.
For her.
Right. I'm just thinking in that scenario, would we say, I mean, I guess define it's how you define being alive or dead. And if you're
Right.
defining dead of having no pulse, then
That was how, someone defined it.
right.
She would say, oh, well, dead people must have a pulse then. So
What do you think about that?
I think it's an example that we can look at in how our brain operates. When your brain once decides upon something, and later on, she did recover from the disease, but she still thinks at the time I was dead. So I guess what I think about that is, to her, that was her epiphany. That was what she brought. She had her aha moment of being dead. And no matter what people told her, she'd say, oh, well, then you must not know that dead people have a pulse. And how I'm comparing that to me is not through a mental illness, but it is how I feel about myself.
Yeah.
And so if you would tell me, well, science says there's no such thing, I would say, oh, well, science hasn't talked to me yet, or they haven't looked at me.
Right.
Or if science said, well, it turns out everything about the body is the exact same, although they haven't said that, I'd say, well, they haven't examined my brain yet, because this is how I feel. But in that vein, I like to have science, and I do have science to support me. And I think what I'm saying is nothing trumps my own epiphany about how I feel about this.
Yeah, I understand
Yes.
that. Yeah, and I get that.
Yeah, okay.
I do. And I think where you have landed, and please tell me if I'm incorrect, because I can
Sure.
be, is that, yes, the science is important to you, but sort of screw the science, this is how you feel. And it's nice to have the science support what you
Yeah,
think.
I don't want to say screw the science. The science is important.
but it wouldn't change how you think about it.
Right.
You would still feel this way, and this way would be like, this is how I feel, and this is a true feeling that I have.
Yes.
This is a real feeling that I have.
A real feeling.
And that's, I think, basically all you were saying.
Yes, yes.
And I do think that it's really interesting how you bring up that other example, and I'm wondering if that is a similar example, or I wonder if that's a different example about the lady who thought she was dead, and that was true for her.
That was true for her.
Or she thought that was an objective. I understand that she probably had an objective feeling about it. But I'm wondering if, for lack of a better word, and tell me if I should use a different word, transness is something, if you feel it, you can't objectively show someone otherwise.
Correct.
But feeling deadness, I'm wondering if that's something where that's more demonstrable to others, whether that feeling is maps onto something real.
I think so. I think I used an exaggerated maybe example. There are other examples of people whose bodies go numb and they don't feel that, say their arm goes numb. They don't feel like their arm is a part of them anymore.
If you say that you feel transgender, couldn't say yes you do or no you don't. I mean, that's how you feel.
Exactly.
And
You cannot tell me, no, you don't.
I feel dead. If someone says I feel dead, I'm wondering if, well, yes, you feel dead, but by definition, that feeling might suggest you're not.
Right. And they would come back to you and say, well, your definition is incorrect.
Yeah, my definition is incorrect.
Yes.
And so then someone can come back to me and say, what it means to be dead is to feel dead.
Yeah. To her, that's how she would feel.
Yeah, to her.
To her.
And that's fine. I'm wondering if it's not fine if we're living in a world where, let's say, someone goes to the hospital and they say, tell the doctor I feel dead. And the doctor goes, okay, well, let's take you to the morgue.
Go ahead and bury you. Wait, no. It'd be interesting to see what would happen.
Yeah, I think that, and I know that's being
But she
sarcastic, but I think...
But no, she might tell the doctor, well, you don't know the meaning of the word dead. Your definition of dead is incorrect.
Right. And I think where I'm getting at is that there needs to be probably some shared reality of some point that we agree on some sort of definitions of some things.
We do. We have to. I agree. And this is about what I'm talking about. I don't want to conflate this with other things. It is how I feel about myself and who I am. I don't want to take that and say, oh, well, then if somebody feels the vaccine is wrong, then that should be okay.
Yeah, that's what you're saying.
I think there you would have to use science. But again, if you're talking to someone who's an anti-vaxxer, you can provide them facts all day, and they might say, no, I disagree with you. My science shows something completely different. And then we get into confirmation bias.
You're absolutely, that makes perfect sense to me.
Yes, you're getting into confirmation. You're looking for those stories. And not only you're looking for those stories, but an algorithm is helping you. When you're searching when you're looking at the internet, those are the stories that are going to come to you.
How you Google something.
Yes, how you Google something.
Yes.
And so then we get into confirmation bias and we ignore maybe what the preponderance of science is. And I do not think that's correct.
And thank you for getting more to the premise of the show. It's not about so much about getting to what facts you have.
Yes.
It's getting to the epistemology, how you go about finding the things you know. And how you know about knowing the things you know. And are those ways that you know things, reliable ways to know those things.
Right. And I do study people who disagree with me. And I do study detransitioners. For instance, the 60-Minute story that was recently on about May 23rd, talks about people who detransitioned.
Yeah.
And I agree. That's how they felt.
Right.
But I do not feel that I could feel that way.
So how should we take this conversation then? It seems like I think we've resolved most things.
Yeah.
I think. And if we haven't, I'm sure we'll hear about it. And so the original belief. I don't know if I can restate it without thinking about it for a second. That
the sex assigned to you at gender does not denote your gender identity.
That your gender does not, I think to be more clear what you said last time, that gender does not determine who...
The sex you were assigned at birth, which is, I'm using the sex assigned to you at birth.
Okay, let's talk about it. So the sex at birth does not determine your gender. Is that
identity.
What you're saying? Gender identity.
Well, it depends on how you use the word. And people throw around those words
So sex we're going to define just as male or female.
Yes.
Sex does not determine your gender or gender identity.
My gender identity.
Does it determine your gender?
It depends on how you're defining gender, which can be defined in multiple ways. There are a lot of people...
Oh, no, you define it.
Okay, there are a lot of people who say, well, gender is the same thing as sex.
Is it?
I do not think so, because I associate gender with gender identity.
Okay, and you'll have to help me.
But there are people who could look up numerous definitions of the word gender and say, no, gender and sex are the same. My gender to me is female, as well as my gender. To me, I'm referring to gender as my gender identity. I think it's preposterous that the doctor could say, this one's a boy, this one's a girl, and then every decision after that has to be made in that vein when that serves no purpose.
So gender and sex, are we talking about like a genotype and a phenotype kind of thing, or what?
Right.
Is that what we're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and to me, sex can be defined as what's between your legs, whereas gender is defined what's between your brain. What's between your two ears, sorry.
So then what's the difference between gender and gender identity then?
Well, I associate the two together.
Okay, so we're talking about gender.
And most
we're talking
transgender
about
people
gender
do.
Identity.
Gender identity.
Is that
how I identify, my gender that I identify with?
Saying that gender and gender identity is the same, is this how you see it, or is this how typically this is discussed?
It's discussed this way a lot.
Okay.
And so many of these legislature hearings, so many of the people that are fighting against transness will say, no, that's your gender is your sex, and that's how you are assigned at life. And you're confusing people when you tell them their gender identity is something they can choose when it's not.
I see. So what you're saying is there may be people out there who confabulate sex with gender.
Correct.
When they should be confabulating gender with gender identity.
With gender identity, exactly. And that's
And when people do make this differentiation between gender and gender identity, and I know you don't, but what is the differentiation they're making? So I can understand why are they saying that there's a difference between gender and gender identity? And I know you don't believe this.
No, I don't. I think that typically the two have just always been used synonymously. For instance,
so that's just how. So that hasn't been changed.
We talk about gender neutral bathrooms. So we talk about you got to go to the bathroom. Your gender was assigned.
Okay, I got you.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And your belief is that we're born with a sex.
Right.
And that doesn't relate to your gender/gender identity.
That is correct. Nicely put, I would say.
Why do we use gender at all?
I think that's a good question. I think in many languages, they may not have gender. It's just how our language has grown, that sex and gender were synonymous for many years. I can't tell you the origin of the word, why gender came about. I don't know why there are two words that people used for sex and gender synonymously. I can't tell you what the derivation of the word sex came from. I think that it's a recent phenomena for people to now claim their gender as their gender identity. And there are many people who disagree with me who use gender synonymously still with sex.
Yeah.
I don't know, but the word's out there.
Yeah.
Just as transgender is out there as a word. And I may say, I don't want to be referred to as transgender. I want to be referred to as woman.
And when we're talking about gender and gender identity, as it's different from sex, are we saying that you don't choose your sex, but you do choose your gender identity?
Correct. I don't think, because you don't necessarily have a say in the matter. Let's go to some exceptions here. Intersex children. Mm-hmm. Children that the doctor holds up and says, this child's female.
Chromosomal issues like XXY.
But then later on it's determined that they have testes that are not descended.
Sure.
So was the doctor incorrect? Is the doctor not 100% correct then when they hold up a child and they say, this one's male, this one's female?
And so what are we basing it on at that level then? Someone's sex? Are we basing it on the chromosomes? Or are we basing it on their physical appearance?
It's what the doctor says and what the doctor puts down.
What is the correct way, you think, to identify someone at that point? You know what I mean? Chromosomally, just what the doctor says, what you see visually?
I'm saying that what the doctor decides is not something that should determine how you identify with in life. Because the child, say that was female, that did not have the descendant testes.
Right. No, I'm just trying to get my definitions
feel
down.
That she is male.
Right. No, I'm just trying to get my definitions of what we're talking about.
I'm saying that the assignations that are assigned can be incorrect.
Okay.
And it should not determine the course of your life being in one box or another box.
I think you're telling me that one's sex at birth isn't as solid as we think either.
Correct.
Is that what you're...
Correct.
Okay.
Because in my mind, I believe the doctor should have said, oh, okay, well, this child appears male, but I don't know how they're going to identify with themselves. I think that...
So there's no, and this really comes out of a place of ignorance, but there's no hard definition of what it is to be a certain sex. I think you're telling me is not.
I think there are always going to be exceptions. There's hermaphrodites.
We don't go by how someone looks. We don't go by chromosomal issues. We don't go by obviously some blood, or maybe not. Obviously, I guess depending on what you're measuring for.
You know, there the line always moves, and like people said back, say 40 years ago, well, you're not a woman because you can't have a baby. Well, but then we say there are lots of women who can't have children, or they say, well, you don't even further back, they may say, well, you don't have breasts. You can't be a woman, or you don't have this, or you don't have this body part. And of course now, and I use this as an example, and I can't remember the child's name, but it was the boy who wanted to use the bathroom according to how he identified, which was male. And so they would come back and they'd say, well, you're not female, or you're female because you have breasts, or you're female because this is what's on your birth certificate. And he did everything to change that. Yeah. And they still came back, and the final thing they came back was chromosomes.
So, would we say that chromosomes would have the final say, or that's what they were saying, but what would you say?
I would say the chromosomes do not have a final say in how you identify.
Not how you identify.
Right.
No. Just sex at birth. Like what your sex is.
No, because one day there might be a way to change your chromosomes. Chromosomes have lots of variations. Or let's say you can't change your chromosomes, but let's say we discover there are so many variations in XY and XX that we didn't know were there before. For instance, and they do determine that there are many variants of XY.
And I find that interesting.
Because you're looking at a very complex string.
Yeah. And I find that interesting. And I know we kind of talked about this a little bit last time in this example. And I know this is probably, when we're talking about sex, it's probably more of a complicated array of chromosomes and factors that come in. But last time we talked about blood type, and I think that might be more straightforward. Someone's either born with a O blood type or an AB blood type, and that's the type.
Yes.
And we're saying someone's sex at birth is different.
I am saying that. I'm saying it's different in how they might wish to identify.
And it's different in the sense that their sex at birth might not be...
There are exceptions.
That's more fluid too.
Correct. There are exceptions, yes.
So when someone is born, we identify their sex, but that may or may not be... It depends what we're using and definitional changes, and we could be wrong, and we can't use one thing. So we could identify someone's sex, but that might not mean too much. Right. And then that person could change whatever that fluid thing is to a different fluid thing, which may be different than the first.
Yes.
And so I think I see where you're coming from. So So I'm wondering why we have gender then at all. What are we defining?
Me too, especially when it's used to take away people's rights. Especially when we say, no, we've already assigned you a gender. You're not allowed to participate in sports.
What would be
when it's used as a weapon?
What would be the advantage of talking about people in terms of gender? Can you think of a positive reason to do that?
It's hard for me to think of that now, as much of a hammer as that word has been used to talk about gender. I think in the best and the most positive way we can talk about gender is to say that a child can feel a different gender identity. In other words, I would like to use gender only as a mechanism to say, how do you identify yourself?
Yeah.
And
I'm trying to think of when we use, during times in our lives when we need to write down gender or need to refer to someone's gender. And I'm thinking, well, I guess when we go to the hospital, that they kind of want to know that. And I've seen for governmental issues or recording issues, they seem to want to know it then.
But why?
Yeah, no, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah. Well, that's my question. Yeah. Why?
And I'm
what is the... Is the treatment going to be different? Are you going to be treated differently if you have female as opposed to male?
And I'm trying to think of a positive reason of why. I mean, I could maybe think of some reasons why possibly you would need to have that described, maybe. But I think that should come to you from you if you think if you think there is a positive reason to do that. A good
No,
reason.
I don't think what's between your legs
So we shouldn't just. We should just
matters.
Get rid of,
how you should be
oh,
treated.
yeah. And I want to make it clear. I'm not saying whether that matters in the sense that making a judgment of that person of their worth.
Right.
Just to make sure. What I'm saying
Or
is,
even how they should be treated if they've been treated differently. Does that make sense?
I think so.
I think too long. Think about the thousands of years we have treated women so abhorrently because they were women, because they were assigned to do certain tasks. Our future society should move away from that.
Okay. So I'm going to try to strengthen your position then. Let's say that we shouldn't have gender. We shouldn't refer to gender. There's no reason for it. And that we should just go with completely neutral pronouns, they, or whatever pronouns we decide as a culture, and it not matter. And I assume... Go ahead. Am I not strengthening your position?
That's not my position.
Okay.
No,
then I'm not doing a good job.
No, that's okay. Because to me, I still believe in the binary. Now that's for me. I still believe, in other words, I believe that I identify, my gender identity is that of a woman.
Okay.
So I prefer to be called ma'am. I do not like they and them for me. But that does not mean
they're not... If we got rid of genders, wouldn't we get rid of everything but they and them?
It's possible, but I and where we are right now, we have not gotten rid of gender. So my preferred pronouns, and that's why people are asking them today, would be she, her.
Yeah.
But it's okay for people who are non-binary and say, I prefer to be they, them. That's part of getting rid of assigning...
If there's truly no reason for it, then why have any of it?
Because right now, there still is a reason. There are differences, and I think...
Like, maybe help me. Like, what differences are we talking about?
Differences in... To me, the pronouns are the engine that drives the great gender machine.
It's describing something.
It is.
Presumably.
It's describing how people see me. And because we have gender and because we have male or female, I prefer that women see me as female and identify me as such. The same reason that I would like for them to identify me as Deanna. I see what you're getting. In a utopian world, maybe we could do away with male and female. But in this world, the way we're existing today, I prefer to be referred to as female or woman.
If we got
some people would
rid
say
of all that,
yes,
rid of gender, and then by definition, I mean, yes, we're getting rid of gender, we're getting rid of gender identity because, well, you have one identity, human.
Human.
And I'm wondering, let's say in that utopian world, we got rid of all that, and we just had that one gender. I wonder if people in their minds would make these classifications without those definitional differences. That's a difficult question, but maybe I'm trying to...
I think they would, because humans are always designed to categorize.
So what are they categorizing?
So they categorize hair color. And we talked briefly about this. A redhead.
Right.
It's about the same. It was
that's
about
what
2%.
I'm wondering. That's what if
We're
someone
always going
let's
to...
say someone's blonde hair and someone has red hair, and we say, you know what, we're going to collapse those two things, and people who have blonde hair and red hair, we're going to say that we're going to make a new color, and that's what their hair is.
Yeah. Your
and
hair
everyone's
is...
the same.
Yeah.
And we can do that, but I'm wondering, are we getting rid of a distinction that there's a distinction there? You know, we can think about getting rid of it and talk about it, but people will still see it differently.
People will still see it differently.
So what are they...
And because of that, I prefer to be seen as woman. As long as I'm in this society, I choose not to be a they. I choose to be a she or a her. But what I don't like is where you try and take someone's gender identity and then try and take or force them into a certain box.
Yeah.
In other words, you can call me that. That's how I prefer to be called, but you shouldn't say, well, you can't go in a woman's bathroom because of what's between your legs.
Yeah.
Or you can't, because you have a XY chromosome, you're not allowed to go in a woman's bathroom. Right now, we still have boys and girls bathrooms, right?
Yes.
Well, there are some gender neutral bathrooms, and that's grown. So I think you can take a look at that and say, well, we've grown. I mean, how many years ago was it we passed the bathroom bill? And of course, that's been done away with. But the bathroom bill was very harmful to us because you were trying to tell us you must go in this room because of what the doctor assigned you at birth, not because of your gender identity.
Yes, I see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
So the gender assigned to us at birth does not determine who we are.
Correct.
Or our gender identity.
Correct.
And that is determined internally.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I see where you're coming from.
Okay. That's great. Thank you. I don't know what to say. This is why, though, and I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt your thought. I think it's awesome to have a part 2 of these because it really allows you to move away from the first conversation and really think about what you said and maybe what some other people have said when you tell them about it. And I feel I came here today with a lot more clear thought.
Me too.
Yeah, than I did the first time.
And you're basically saying this is not subjective, but this is an experience that you have, and no one can say that you don't have. You have a different experience,
right? Exactly.
And this is your experience.
This is my experience,
and that your experience, regardless of whether how we define someone's sex at birth, and if that's possible or not, that whatever that sex was assigned to you at birth, that is never how you felt.
That is not ever how I felt.
And you feel this way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And my story is not your story. And I do not want to say that it should be, because I think people are very fortunate when their identity matches how they were assigned at birth.
And trying to take it to its logical conclusion, which I think I was getting at, is that if we had no gender identity in that sense, and we didn't sex type people, then you would never be that angst of being assigned one thing and feeling another way.
Correct.
Are we saying that wouldn't
It causes
happen?
a lot of angst. I would hope so. I don't know if it's possible.
Yeah.
I really don't. I don't know if it's possible for us to ever get to that point. I think, look at the past 20 years or 10 years. I like the way Laverne Cox says it. She said, these are the best of times, these are the worst of times, because there's so much more awareness now of transgender people, and there's so much more usage for they, them. But we're not there yet. I mean, we're still in a huge fight to be able to, play in sports teams that we identify with, or get medical assistance.
Yeah, and I'm really trying to think of the downside of doing that, and I haven't thought it through clearly.
Yeah.
Of doing something like that, and there might not be, but I'm trying to think of where that could get us into a bit of trouble. I guess abstractly, I'm thinking it would get us into trouble when someone's sex or their internal organs or the way their organs run as opposed to someone else's organs who might or typically is a different sex, how knowing that or the other could be really important. Maybe like an emergency hospital situation. I don't know.
It's possible.
Okay.
It's possible. I agree with you. It's possible. But let the doctor examine the person.
And then and maybe when you're like you're being rushed in and they need to know, are you this or that?
Right.
And then how would we describe it then to them?
Well, I would think that the doctor
really needs to know, like, do you have a uterus or not? Because we're ruling out a uterine cancer. Right? And how would, if there are no genders at that point, what would we say? Like, oh, yes, I have a uterus, and not say a gender, or I'm sorry, gender, not say a sexual type, or I'm just trying to think of that through.
Yeah, I think that the body's made up of millions of differences.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the doctor has ways to, say, perform a blood test or look at the body, examine it.
Yeah.
And determine, oh, well, she doesn't have a uterus. There are women who may not have that.
Yeah. Why do you think people make that distinction? I wonder.
Because it's how you're taught. You're taught your whole life. You can't be separated from it. That goes back to my example at the beginning. Think of how you were raised. I think we make that distinction because we have always done it that way. And we've always used it as a bludgeon to either give someone rights or take someone's rights away.
Let's give you a sort of a Lord of the Flies thought experiment.
Okay.
Let's say there were, 20 children, neonates, that are put on this island, and then they were raised by wolves. It's an interesting thought.
Don't take away their identity as a wolf.
Yeah, it's a good thought experiment. They were raised by wolves. These 20 neonates are put on an island, and they get older, and they develop, and they go through puberty and all that kind of stuff. Do you think that growing up without gender, they would just never come to that, or never growing with a being sexually typed at birth? What do you think in that case would happen? They would go through their lives and not see sexual types as different, or maybe they would see different sexual types and they'll see genders different than that. You know what I'm saying? Like,
if you had 20 people,
yeah,
20 people, I am 94% sure. I'm sorry, 99.4% sure that they would grow into the identity that they were born with. And I say that because...
So do you think that they would come up with distinctions in different words to describe their quote-unquote self-described genders?
Let's go back to that thought experiment, if you could. And so maybe I didn't catch all of it.
Right.
So let's edit
it was me. It was confusing.
Out. Yeah, okay.
So this thought experiment, in my mind, is designed to get rid of the cultural factors. Culture, society, parents saying you are born with a certain sexual type, and then there's also this gender that you either identify with or don't identify with. I'm thinking with this thought experiment that this would get rid of all that, because you have 20 babies that are being raised by wolves and they have no one teaching them that stuff. Would they, when they get older, do you think that they would classify themselves and have different words for their sexual type at birth, if that is a thing, and B, would they self-classify, do you think, or have words for maybe 2 different genders, or maybe 8 different genders? I don't know. How do you think that would work out?
Are you saying they're all... this is where I misunderstood you, because I was thinking Lord of the Flies, which were all boys.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right. When you said Lord of the Flies, I thought, they were all boys.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. Neonates A whole range of sexes.
So it gets a whole range. Yes, I think they would. I think they'd say, you have this appendage or you don't have this appendage. Yes, I think we're designed to do that. Just as they would say,
So they would come up
you
with,
have blonde.
They would come up with genders,
That's just
probably.
the way humans are.
And then they would,
Yeah.
that's what you're saying, and then
Yeah.
and those genders would likely be based on appearance.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And I think...
So when we are talking about a utopian world, and you're telling me that it's hard to get there because we have society kind of beating us down on what we need to do.
Yes.
I think what you're telling me from that thought experiment is that there is no utopian world here. That this is
right.
how...
No,
This is...
there's not.
So there is going to be classifications
Yes.
with genders. You can't escape it. And if we decided that a utopian world would to get rid of genders, what would we be gaining, do you think? Is it just, not just, but is it the fact that the people who are born and assigned a certain sex and then identify later as a different gender, that people like that wouldn't go through anything because everyone's the same gender? It just wouldn't really be thought of differently. I don't know if that makes sense. Probably doesn't.
That's just...
I'm going to scratch that if you want.
No, it's hard to imagine that we would ever not look for those differences. I guess it's a good thought experiment, but it's just hard for me to imagine. It's like saying, imagine that we would not classify people as short or tall, or their height.
Right.
Right. When you go to a doctor's office,
Right.
your height is on there.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we look for ways to classify people.
Yeah, I think
and we
so.
call people short. We call people tall.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it's just, I don't know that I have enough faith in the human race to ever not look at someone. I think of that infamous Star Trek episode where one side of the face was black and the other side was white, and it was reversed, and the two were at war with each other.
Yeah, I don't remember that one.
Yeah, it was one of the original ones. But
Yeah.
and the people on the Enterprise were like, wait, this makes no sense.
And it seems like humans were doing this for a reason. Maybe could we say that there's an advantage to do that at some level, whether to describe someone as tall or short, or mean or not mean? That could be a good distinction to make. Or
Well, maybe it had a primordial reason.
a what?
A primordial reason for
You mean
the
like
hunter to be the men, to go out and hunt,
Okay.
to have the strength.
So maybe, are you getting like an evolutionary reason?
An evolutionary reason, it's very possible. But just as we have a lot of holdovers from our primordial selves that are of no use to us today.
So we're just saying then is classifying people as different genders. There's no use for that now. There might have been before, and
Right.
we're primed to make these distinctions.
We're primed to make those.
But
yes, it doesn't
when we
serve
look
any
at
purpose.
it serves no purpose.
Serves no purpose. Women can do a job just as well as a man can, if not better, in some ways. And
I'm trying to think of something
So it's a
contrarian to say to that,
yes,
just for the fact of doing that.
Yes.
And I'm trying to.
I am
of
not
how
going
I
to
would-
sit here and tell you that
Yeah.
it may not have served some value in our prehistoric history.
No, right now. I'm just trying to think of something.
Yes.
I'm trying to think of a scenario, and I can't. And but I'm trying to. The best thing I can come up with is the being rushed to the hospital
Yeah.
reason, and that just came up with that. Yeah, but so you're saying that now that there's just no reason for it, and it's just hard for me to step in that world because I've been in this world for so long.
Exactly, and so was I. I mean,
So presumably we'd have names, and none of these names would have all these names would be neutral.
Neutral, yeah.
So I've got to think that. And then...
A lot of parents are choosing more neutral names now.
What's that?
A lot of parents are choosing more neutral names now.
Right. And then I'm trying to think what else would be different. I guess, right, we'd have one bathroom for everybody. Right? Or no?
We could. It could be that way. Gender neutral bathrooms.
Okay.
It's possible, but we don't have that today.
No, right. I'm just trying to think of, like, if we just got rid of gender as a thing.
Well, I think about, you're right, it's hard to come up with any other example in the emergency room. I think about, like, sports. I mean, in Chapel Hill, there's a female player.
Yeah, and
who's not a kicker.
We wouldn't describe as someone as a male or female on
say,
this
well, you
team.
can't play because you're female.
Yeah, it wouldn't. Yeah, we wouldn't. But would we still? Do you think we would still describe a person like in a different ways? Like this person, we wouldn't describe as gender, but we might describe other features, or we would get rid of all these kinds of descriptions. Would we get rid of racial descriptions too?
Again, I cannot see that as possible. Let me go back to your.
But I guess I'm really trying to take this to its logical. Yeah.
When it comes to sex, there's a lot more tied up into it with our human race. For instance, a majority of people are attracted to members of the opposite sex, right? Mm-hmm. That's just how they feel, and that's okay. And listen, I am not saying that has anything to do with gender. I'm saying that I think that right now, most people, I mean, of course there are gay people, but right now most people would probably make that distinction because of who they might be attracted to. Like they may say to someone, well, I think this type of girl is very pretty and I would like to be with her. But then that does not apply holistically, because you also have another group of people out here saying, well, I think the person of the same gender as me.
Okay.
So I do think that would also be added into the mix, and I don't want to preclude that. But that has nothing to do with my gender identity, who you're attracted to. So I'm allowing you
your gender Go ahead.
I'm allowing you to think that, well, because we have approximately 85% of the population be attracted to members of the opposite gender, there's always going to be that distinction made. And that's also the way that we propagate the population.
And I'm thinking this analogy doesn't hold.
Yes.
So, but tell me how it doesn't hold, because I'm trying to understand this. What if someone is born white on appearance, and they're being assigned whiteness because of appearance, and later on they identify as being black? That is their identity. That's how they see themselves, and that's how they want to be referred to as. Is this analogy not hold up, or does it hold up?
We'll get a lot of trouble for this.
No. This is why I started off saying this analogy probably doesn't hold up, because they're probably not thinking it through. But it helps me understand where you're coming from. Like, where is it different, and where is it this similar?
I think it's a biological difference in people that could be compared to being the same.
So you think it is similar?
I think it is similar.
So then we could have somebody...
What is the use in the distinction between black and white?
Okay. And there might not be a useful distinction.
There's not. There shouldn't be. There is. But there shouldn't be any use in that distinction in the color of your skin, even more so than the size of your nose.
And and we should make a distinction between, there's some should statements in there, and there's a should statements in there in the sense that, we should not distinguish someone as being this gender or this gender. We should not distinguish, someone being this race or this race.
Right.
And I guess we classify, as humans, we classify, and we talked about that. It seems like we
Yes, we always
classify.
classify.
I'm trying to think of, trying to take this to its logical conclusion, and you want to, Jimmy is over there, and Jimmy happens to be white, and we want to say that person, and we want to describe that person we're trying to talk to everyone about over there, who's standing over there with other people, and we want to distinguish that person from other people, and then so we wouldn't be able to do that on race if we didn't have those words.
Right.
And we wouldn't be able to do it on gender if we didn't have those words. And then I guess we could go pretty even further. We didn't have words for tallness, and we didn't have words for hair color, and we didn't have...
Right.
And so at some point we lose what language would be. And I know this, I'm probably going way out there on that, but what do you think about that?
I think humans will always try and classify people.
Right.
We're always going to do that.
Right.
I don't know if that's throughout the universe. I know it's true here on planet Earth.
Yeah.
My problem is when you try and take away someone's rights for identifying in a certain way.
So then could we say that classification, which seems to be a human thing to do,
Right.
that we classify people in this way or that way by race or by gender or by hair color or by height
Or even by heritage.
or by heritage, that we can use classifications, and that's a fine thing to do. And then when classifications are used to take away rights from someone or elevate it to another group, then at that point, we get rid of those classifications.
But what you're suggesting, I cannot see it possible for people to get rid of classifications. And maybe that's because we've always done that. Ideally, yes, we could move away from classifications, but we're always going to look at people and say, how are you different from me? Or like to say, well, you know what? Your heritage is Indian, and I have preconceived notions about them, so I don't want to hire you. Or you have preconceived notions about anybody, so I don't want to hire you. It's hard for me to imagine getting rid of all classifications because we're just designed to do that. But maybe I can't even go there in my head, but one day that could possibly happen.
Yeah.
I mean, I would like to not have the a lot of transgender people would like to not have the classification of transgender.
Yeah.
But they do.
And I'm trying to think of scenarios where classifications could be really important. Like crucial. And it may be something that's genetically related or not genetically related, but just, if I'm going to the hospital, again, with that example, I would like that classification of someone who earned an MD, that classification is very important to me if they're judging what's wrong with me.
Right. I get that. But there are a myriad of ways you could be different from someone. You could have had cancer and had something in your body removed that's very important.
Yeah.
Your blood type. Let's go back to the blood types. It's very important.
That's another example. Yeah. Right.
Because they don't want to give you blood from someone who's different blood type.
Right. So are we still thinking that in a utopian world then that we should still get rid of genders of like he and her and go with they? Or are we saying that that's regardless of what people are designed to do? Well, are we saying that... Go ahead.
I was just going to say I'm transgender in 2021.
Yeah.
Where he and she are used every day.
Right. I'm trying to think of your core belief here.
Is there a way we could move away from that?
Well, your belief is that it does, the way you're born does not dictate your
pronouns.
Gender.
That's right.
And I'm thinking, then why do we, with that going to its logical conclusion, we shouldn't have any pronouns, except for one pronoun, because then that would take away all that. And maybe I'm not seeing it correctly.
Maybe it's possible one day that's true. Maybe it's possible, but it's
A,
not true in
A,
2021.
is it possible? And B,
Yeah.
are there reasons not to do it? And if there are reasons not to do it, then are there reasons not to? Are there reasons to have these words of what gender you're identifying with? And if that's the case, then are we saying that people who are born trans, who are transgender in the sense that they're born one way and they think that they are another way, that is going to be the messy side effect of that? Did I say that right? That we have to have those distinctions for some reason, that they serve a purpose.
What is the purpose he and him use when you're in conversation with people? Like, what is the purpose in saying yes, ma'am, or no, sir?
Yeah, I can't think. I'm trying to think it through. I'm not, and that's what I'm trying to encapsulate the issue.
It's just the way we've always done it. We say she went to the store.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's that classification again we have of a woman.
Right.
Well, what is that purpose?
Right.
They went to the store. I get what you're saying about, do we just
if
do
there
away?
was no purpose to it, let me put it this way: how could we find out that there was no purpose to it? Maybe that's the best way a better way to put that question. If there was no purpose to have a gender, how could we arrive at that if that was a true thing to arrive at?
I think we could arrive at it by understanding that your gender or how you're referred to does not matter on how you're treated in everyday life, or how you're how people treat you. I think I just, for instance, look at European languages. House may be feminine or it may be masculine. Right. La. Why do we have that?
In the German language especially, or Germanic languages, things are assigned genders, or things are neutral for some reason.
Why do we do that? Why in the world would we assign that to an inanimate object?
Right. Yeah, and I see that. And I'm trying to think of when we're talking about people. Yeah, and I guess, when we're talking about a car, what difference does it make? And when we talk about people, what difference does it make? Or does it make a difference? Is there a reason? And if there is a reason, what would that reason be? And is that a good reason? And if there was no reason, then why do we do it? And how could we discover that having no reason would be the better way to go? I know I threw a lot at you there, but I think that's interesting.
I think it's a great question. I think 50 years from now, we might move more towards that.
Yeah.
As new generations come along. I mean, I just think about how they, them is accepted in many places. And it wasn't before. So it's very possible. It's just, to me, I live in this world today.
Yeah.
And pronouns do drive that gender engine, and that's how I want people to see me.
And just so I can have like a mile high view of this, and I kind of sometimes I try to see how I'm being perceived. I try to, and I can just see my nieces, who are a lot younger than me, they're in high school, like looking at this and like, Uncle Mark, what are you talking about? Like, just like you're too old. You just don't get it, you know. And I just want to. I think I'm having one of those moments.
That is okay. And in my experience, it's amazing how older people have treated me differently than younger people.
Right.
And so that's what I'm saying.
That's what I'm saying.
That change is coming.
Yeah, and that's right. And that's what I'm saying. I don't want to. I want to believe in true things, and I don't want to believe in something just because of the age of my body, and I haven't thought about something too much.
Right.
That's the last thing I want to do. Right.
Me either. I'm the same way. I don't want to be set in my ways that I can't think about new information, take it in, internalize it, and think about, okay, well, because you've asked a very good question. Why do we?